All right. Well, had a little technical difficulties this morning. I couldn't get the system to run. So now we finally have it up and running. So sorry about being a couple minutes late. But the StreamYard actually network was down and wasn't working right. So it wouldn't even let me into the studio. So anyways, good morning, everybody. Definitely a lot of action here happening with the weather situation. So many people have died. The death toll now is way up over like 160 and still counting. So, and I hear that weather is also happening in Chicago. Now they're getting flooding. Of course, in the Southeast, we're getting flooding. So the weather has really kicked up. And I got to say, this Mars Ketu, along with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And it's interesting, Neptune and Saturn are very close. They're not exactly conjunct, but they're within like a degree of the fixed star Pleiades. Now, I know they call them fixed stars. They're really not fixed. They actually also do move, but from our perspective, they move about 1 degree every 72 years. So for all practical purposes, that's close to most people's lifetimes, and you could call it fixed. So what's interesting is this fixed star Pleiades is all about death and drowning, and or death by water and drowning by water. So definitely an interesting correlation here to what's happening. Saturn, of course, is going to station and go retrograde here on the 12th, which is right around the corner. So very, very powerful stuff here that's going on right now. And I have to say, we've got a really active month. And of course, look at what's happening. All kinds of things are brewing and murmuring right now. You got this huge opposition to ICE. And of course, the governors, Karen Bass here in California, just said some more crazy stuff. And they're really pushing back. And like I said a long time ago, the empire wants to strike back here. They want to push back. And again, this is very mysterious, where I hear from people, that a lot of these rioters aren't just peaceful rioters. They have riot gear. They have, bricks being supplied to them, Molotov cocktails, and they seem a little more prepared than your average person who's just angry about what the government's doing. And now we're hearing reports where people are literally saying, we need more violence. We need more people willing to take a bullet. So this is going to get crazy. And what we've got here is opposing forces. I've been saying this for years. It's the globalists against the nationalists. And I'm actually kind of surprised, they haven't made more overt and, intense attempts on Trump's life, because the owners don't like this. And Trump, I hear, just got the go-ahead to cancel more of these programs, these NGOs and other programs from the Supreme Court to, cancel the budgets. And again, follow the money. It's always where the money is when, you see how these things are funded. And I can tell you, very, very powerful times right now. But I don't think at this juncture, we're going to see the globalists come out on top here at this point. And that's what's kind of scary, because, they're going to push back hard any way that they can. And another thing I want to mention here that's quite interesting, and I've been mentioning this, on the spring equinox of this year, I literally saw that there was going to be a lot of prosecutions or things coming unraveled that had happened in the past. And I did that through the Kala Chakra Dosha. And also I was looking at, Trump's inauguration chart. I've never seen a chart for an inauguration of a president this transformational and with this much intensity. Very, very powerful. And of course, what did we just hear? The Department of Justice has now opened in criminal investigations on both Brennan and Comey. So this is definitely coming down the pike here. And I think you're going to see not only that, but a lot of other things open up. And of course, as we speak, apparently the doctor who was the White House physician is being questioned right now as we speak in Washington about why was Biden's cognitive decline not declared more. So again, this all fits with the astrology, what I'm seeing this year. A lot of stuff is going to come unraveled, and it's going to be really intense this year. And I think by the time we see fall into next year, there's going to be a crescendo of things happening because, again, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and also Radcliffe is really a kind of a wild card to me, that John Radcliffe. He's an interesting guy to watch when you see him on the news. You know, he's kind of smiling as everyone else is talking, like he knows a lot of things that he doesn't say. And I thought that was really interesting watching him in a cabinet meeting the other day with Trump and all the rest of the people. And, again, the CIA has been around a long, long time. And, I personally have never been in that genre, but I did have a grandfather, and I do have some clients that are in this area. My grandfather wasn't in the CIA, but he actually was in Washington working supposedly for a security company that was much more than security. And again, our government, as well as other governments, the stuff that goes on behind the scenes is kind of mind-boggling. And just a little exposure I've had to some of this stuff doing forensics work, I can tell you the amount of espionage research, spying, all this stuff is colossal. They can literally look under someone's fingernails without them even knowing it. And, so very interesting stuff that's going on. And clearly what's happened, I mentioned over and over and over again that I'm surprised the United States didn't get hit worse with this Pluto return that's been going on for the last couple of years. It's been intense. And I have to say, actually the last 4 years, and we had a Neptune square Mars as well. So not that, we didn't get hit, but I'm surprised we didn't get hit worse based on the astrology. So this is a huge turnaround from where we were. And I can tell you that I think we're just getting started. And this is going to be colossal when it all really comes across the pike here. The other thing I've been mentioning too, we do have a full moon that's coming in tomorrow on Thursday, the 10th, at about 1:37 p.m. Pacific time. And again, that always tends to bring things to a heightened emotion. And a lot going on. And then, of course, next week we have the Mars Ketu conjunction on the 20th. We've got Saturn retrograding here just in a few days on the 12th. It's late on the 12th, but powerful stuff. And the biggest one that I've been mentioning over and over again is the Uranus coming over the star Alcyone in the Pleiades. And it's very interesting because the Pleiades is way back in, it's a very narrow area. In fact, this is something someone asked me last session that I did on Saturday. They said, hey, how long is Uranus in the Pleiades? And this is a good question because you got to be careful. Some astrologers will tell you that the Pleiades is just in Taurus, but it's actually quite a small group. In fact, the astronomers actually say that it's pretty narrow. It's actually about 110 minutes of arc across, which is just short of 2 degrees. So in astrology, which really is astronomy, you look at arcs, or what they call there's another name for it here. They call it, I forget what it is, but it's called a minute arc. So what's happening is Uranus is over the Pleiades star cluster. See, the Pleiades really isn't a constellation. It's a star cluster is what they call it. And it's in the first areas of Taurus in the sidereal zodiac. So if you're a tropical astrologer, they're going to tell you, oh, it's, dipping out here and going into Gemini. Well, not in sidereal astrology. In sidereal astrology, which is, of course, what Vedic astrology uses, Uranus is actually going to stay in the sign of Taurus until 2032, but it won't be just over the Pleiades until 2032. So that's about an 8-year period because it entered, I believe it was right about about this earlier this year or last part of last year. I can't be sure of the exact dates, but the bottom line is the Pleiades and the stars within the Pleiades are the issue here to focus on. And the one that it's going over right now is actually known as Alcyone. Now, Alcyone's a really intense star. There's different people who mention different methods of analysis. Some people will tell you that that Alcyone is the nature of Mars. Other people say, no, it's the nature of the moon. So there's a lot of different opinions on stars. I can just tell you it's very powerful. And again, these fixed stars have a very powerful way of rearing their heads when they associate with different planets. And of course, the one it's associated right now is Uranus. And Uranus, like I said, every time this happens, which is about 84 to 86 years, it's a little closer to 84 years, we get trouble in the world and often rebellion against tyranny. Again, the last time this happened was right around World War II, right at the beginnings of it. And the time before that was the Civil War. Time before that, in the United States at least, was the Revolutionary War. So this is all really powerful stuff. And I have to say, the Uranus is not just going to hit Alcyone one time. It's actually going to hit it 2 more times. I actually wrote that down here. Let me put it under the light here and see if I can find that here. Yeah, it's actually going to come back and hit it October 30th. It's happening right now. It's going to see Uranus will station in retrograde, which means it goes backwards. So it's going to come back and hit it in October. Then it's going to come back and hit it one final time in May of 2026. So this isn't over. You know, these things, often things come in threes. The first one is the initiation of the energy. The second hit is the transformation. And the third one is kind of, if you will, the final result. So it's very, very powerful when this happens. So somebody's asking a question here, good question. Would like to know too also, what about Diddy? Suddenly all the major changes are dropped or charges are dropped. Does it make any sense? Not Epstein, not Diddy. Well, I don't know. I'd have to look into that. I'd have to cast a chart on that. I have had people ask, but they never had me cast a chart. So I don't have a snappy answer to that one. I will just tell you that, yeah, it's kind of mysterious. So is the Epstein too, isn't it? I don't buy. I remember back when Epstein was killed, we were actually doing a podcast, and I did have someone ask me, was Epstein murdered or did he commit suicide? Well, I can tell you from the looks of that chart, it certainly doesn't seem like we were told the truth. That's A. B, my suspicions looking at the chart was neither. It could have been where he escaped out the back door and something else was put in place. Now, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories. I don't want to contribute to them, but I can tell you what the chart said. It didn't look like, and isn't it mysterious? Oh, the cameras were off, you know, the body bag, you know, was open. All these mysterious anomalies that just wouldn't happen in a situation like that in a jail. So it was pretty questionable. It's kind of like, you know, Trump's assassination. Oh, magically the guy gets cremated and all the evidence gets swept up in a dustpan and a mop, and they, you know, clean up the whole thing. And sorry, here's the report. You know, they'll hand you some ream of paper, of course, that satisfies all legal requirements, right? Just hand them, you know, 10,000 words in a document. And of course, read the report, right? But the truth is always somewhere else. And I can't speak to Diddy. I can look at it, but if I do it right now during the podcast, it's not going to be good. But anyways, yeah, some people are saying here, I still think he's underground doing the same thing. Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised. Based on the chart that I saw. Again, I'm not here contributing to conspiracy theories, even though a lot of them aren't conspiracy theories. That term was actually invented during JFK's assassination back in the 60s. Conspiracy theories, right? So you know what they say about rumors, don't you? They're usually true. So, or they can be, that's for sure. So one of the things, you know, again, back to the thing I'm talking about right now, I am kind of amazed at how intense the weather is. And, you know, I know a lot of people have been asking about weather manipulation. I haven't really looked into that. I can tell you this, Mars and Ketu, you know, coming together. And for anybody listening who doesn't know what Ketu means, Ketu is the moon's south node eclipse point. And Western astrologers call it the South Node. It's also known as the head and the tail of the dragon. And of course, Ketu is the tail. And Ketu has always been associated with erratic things. And also, they say it's a lower vibration of Mars. I think the ancient Vedic astrology was right. It's kind of a portal out of this reality system, or it skews the reality system that we're all in. In some ways, Rahu is the movie we're playing. You know, Shakespeare was right. The whole world's a stage. You and I are the actors. And of course, Rahu might be the worldly perception of reality. And Ketu is the exit out of the theater, if you will. Or you could say it is otherworldly, unusual activities. Well, look at what's happening right now. You know, Russia has just been hammering the hell out of Ukraine. In fact, I hear the missile and drone attacks that they just did, I think it was last night or just within the last several hours, really intense. So instead of peace, they're hammering even harder. And again, look what we've got going on. The confusion delusion of Neptune and Saturn coming together. And of course, Neptune, I believe, has already gone retrograde. And let me look up my notes. Yeah, it has. And, you know, Saturn's about to go retrograde just in a few days. So what does that mean? Well, retrograde planets always tend to retrace, retract, and make things go deeper and then resolve as it stations and goes direct. It's not always that way, but this is an intense time. And I really would not be surprised at all if we see a lot more violence coming up, potential protests, and the weather really looks erratic. Again, last podcast on Saturday, I did look into some of the reports psychics and intuitives are saying about the earthquake zone over there in the Pacific Southeast, and whether or not there was going to be this huge tsunami that many people. And from the best I can see in the interrogation chart, it says no. It says we could get some earthquakes, and I think we always do in the Pacific. Rim particularly, it's very active. I just had a report on last podcast. Somebody said in the Midwest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, they were feeling the ground vibrating. And, that's something that's really interesting because they said that the Mississippi River flowed backwards for like 2 weeks. Somewhere, I think it was in the mid 1800s, they had a huge, colossal earthquake in the Midwest again, I think it was down in Missouri somewhere. Someone might know about that. But, earthquakes can happen anywhere. They even say there's huge fault lines on the East Coast. So we always hear about the San Andreas out here in California, which definitely, if that ever goes, I won't be here next podcast. But clearly, the Earth is always in a state of change. And like I say, the only constant in the universe is change. But anyways, a lot of people here are commenting on Epstein. And of course, isn't that interesting? Pam Bondi now is like, that's it. No more on Epstein, So clearly there's some, sweeping under the rug here of information, which is often the case when it comes to information coming out of the government. Isn't that always the case? So again, we'll see where all that one goes. But anyways, a lot of people here talking about here, we are in a cycle from 10, 400, 1,000, nano, 10,000 years all at once. Yeah, again, this is, I'm hearing a lot of talk about what's happening with this weather. There's a lot of theories. And one thing's for sure, it is intense right now. And again, this rainfall is not just happening in Texas anymore, which was really horrible, but it's happening in a lot of places. So again, Mars and Ketu, Saturn and Neptune, all these fixed stars, really powerful energies. And so, yeah, it's quite interesting. And as I'd mentioned, we, in about 3 years, have a Saturn-Pluto square. And those always bring trouble as well. It's an interesting thing about the Pleiades. It's a very interesting star group here. Let me see if I can show you here. What I can do, let me see if I can't share the screen here. I'll actually show you a little kind of a cool diagram here that you can see here. share up the screen, and then let me see if I can go into this particular program. You can see this here is kind of a three-dimensional model. And it's a little hard here. Maybe I can circle this to show you, just to kind of give you an idea. But this angular belt here is what they call the zodiacal belt. And it is not linear. And a lot of that is due to the angularity of the Earth. And what's interesting is you could see this is Uranus right here. It's very small on the screen. Well, just above it, that's Alcyone. So watch, if I ping Alcyone, you could actually see the little ping going on there if I hit it a couple times. So you might say, well, what does this mean? Well, Uranus is going to keep traversing in this direction from the right to the left on the screen. And you'll see here the next fixed star, a major one that's going to hit, is called Aldebaran. Now, Aldebaran is not going to happen. I wrote that down, actually. That's going to start next year. When is that? Aldebaran, I actually wrote that down. I don't know exactly the date. We can get into that later. But that's coming up. And it's interesting how slow Uranus moves. I mean, that is one of the outer planets. And it's very interesting. If you look at the glyph of Uranus, it is the two crescents of the moon bent outwards with the cross in the middle. I'm scribbling this here on the screen, with the sun beneath it. And Uranus is a very eclectic, erratic planet that brings change. And when it's associated with these fixed stars, very, very powerful. Again, they call them fixed stars, but they're very powerful. They move exceedingly slow, and they have a lot of power. I'll tell you that. That's one of the things that I have to give the ancient astrologers credit for, is because they would always pay a lot of attention in interrogations and even in electional astrology. And I find it in birth charts as well, that when you have planetary configurations that most astrologers use, like trine, sextile squares, all that, or you have some transit going on in your birth chart, if you have fixed stars connected to that in close association, really can color this one way or another, meaning positive, negative, or intense, weak, etc. So these fixed stars are really powerful. They're not kind of powerful. They really have a lot of punch. And I would say, what we've got going on right now with this kind of cocktail of the Mars-Uranus here until the end of the month, very, very powerful. So, it's a really, crazy energy to watch. And again, look what we're seeing, and furthermore, the Iranian Israeli thing is still not put to bed yet. And Iran is really pushing the envelope over there. Even though they've been really devastated, they're still doing things. So this whole situation is kind of a boiling pot that's going to get a little bit hotter here as we come into the center of summer here in August. And we'll see where it all goes. So, a lot of people are bringing up a lot of questions. Someone's asking me here, what happens when the planets line up behind Earth? Well, that's a great question, because when you really look at astronomy, which is really what truly ancient astrology was, it's the configurations of planets, either juxtaposition to our birth chart, or in mundane astrology, it's the alignment of planets in relationship to the Earth. That's, of course, called geocentric astrology. And it doesn't matter if you're doing Vedic astrology, tropical astrology, or what have you. You're certainly, or sidereal, I should say, you're going to find these alignments are going to be the same. They're not going to change. So there's no difference really in alignments with Vedic or sidereal and tropical astrology. What you'll find is these zodiacal positions, in other words, where they are. There's about a 24-degree difference between tropical and sidereal astrology. So these alignments are powerful. I remember back in 1994, I was out here in California doing a project, and we were recording in North Hollywood in a studio. And I looked at the planetary configurations on my computer. Back then it was DOS, right? So, and on the program that I had at least. And I saw this alignment and I went, wow, this is a tight alignment. And what happened? we had that severe earthquake in Los Angeles in 1994. And boy, let me tell you, that thing was intense. I actually saw the bridge on the 10 freeway coming down to the ocean at Wilshire just drop. The whole bridge was lying on the floor, and chimneys were toppled over. And that was a really dangerous earthquake. They say it was a crust earthquake. In other words, the slip faults when the Pacific North plate and also the North American plate keep doing this underneath each other. That's different. And they say what happens is it puts pressure on the crust surface, and then you'll get these violent earthquakes, which are actually much more severe. And that one certainly was like that. And it was the strangest earthquake too. You'd go 2 blocks, everything was fine. You go another 2 blocks and the road was 2 feet dropped, So these are violent earthquakes. And again, these alignments really seem to be behind that, as well as weather. Again, I find the alignments of the planets have a huge effect on sunspots. There's a lot of correlations throughout the years with Uranus and earthquakes, sudden disruptive change. And I find that that's really true. So, and again, we got a lot of volcanic activity. And a lot of people are saying this, and waves too. I mean, we hear all over the globe, people are getting swamped with waves, huge waves. That's been going on for a while. And again, this might have a connection to what they call the grand solar minimum, which again is a very, very powerful thing that makes the sunspots go through these cycles. And again, that is also connected with Jupiter. So very, very powerful stuff that happens here with alignments on planets. And it's a good question a person asked. And again, when you study the art of interrogation astrology, which again, so for anybody who doesn't know what that is, Western astrologers call that horary. That's a Latinized term. The East in India call it prashna. And what is it? It's literally casting a chart for consciousness at the moment in time. You have a question. You can ask anything. Like, where's my cat? Where's my keys? I could sit here and show you literally tens of thousands of interrogation charts that I have cast. And it's absolutely stunning how accurate it is. And what is it? It's not your birth chart. It is literally casting a chart for the moment and looking at the house in question, which is the area of life or the issues you're asking about. And what's interesting is those are planetary alignments too. It's all literally a matrix of planets that are interacting with our consciousness, which is pretty wild stuff. So anyways, yeah, people are also mentioning here about how the Earth's axis is moving because of the weather patterns. That may be true. I've been hearing a lot about magnetic Earth moving. So far as I can tell, and the information I have available to me, the physical movement of the Earth hasn't moved too much, but the magnetics certainly has. And that's kind of dangerous because they actually say the magnetics sometimes are the precursor to a physical movement. And again, we've been getting an axis tip for 50 something years. As I mentioned, in 1977, I was told, and watched the late great Planet Earth, that documentary with Orson Welles narrating it. And they said, we're going to have 1,000-mile-an-hour winds, by 1985, we're going to have this huge axis tip. And of course, that hasn't happened. But I will say the military has gotten away from the magnetics completely, and they're now using GPS and also geosynchronous stuff that they release in drones and planes and so on and so forth, because magnetics has been skewed a lot. And again, that could be a precursor to an axis tip. I personally think the axis tip will have a connection to consciousness. And this is a very interesting little topic, because when we look at our perception of reality and we look at, again, I always bring up these diagrams, and I'm actually going to haul one up here. That's pretty cool. And again, I know the flat earthers get angry at me for this, but here, I'll show you something that's kind of cool here. And I'll bring this back up on a screen share. So bear with me here while I get over to that. But one of the things that I show a lot is this diagram right here. So it doesn't really matter if the Earth is round or flat or what have you. One thing is for sure, the zodiacal belt goes around at an angle because we are at an angle. And the best information I've heard, we're somewhere around 23.44 degrees. Now, that's kind of heady stuff, but that's why the seasons happen. As we go around the sun, of course, we have what we call the equinoxes. Equinoxes just mean equal. The days and night are equal. Equinox is a Latinized term that just means equality. And of course, the days and the nights are equal. And that is the commencement of summer in the summer solstice and the, beginning of true winter in the winter solstice. So very powerful. And again, we have the, the equinoxes are the spring and fall equinoxes, and the solstices are the summer and winter solstice. So yeah, that I had that wrong. But here's the point with all of this, and what's really important is if you look at these little horseshoes known as Rahu and Ketu, and that's why I brought this up. Rahu is what we call the moon's north node. It's not a planet. It's a mathematical point where the sun and the moon and the earth align during eclipses. And notice way down here on the bottom of the page, I'm circling there, that's Ketu, also known as the tail of the dragon in the south node. If you change the angularity of the earth or the axis of the moon, you will change where these nodal points happen. And there's ancient lore that the sun and the moon and the earth sometimes were not in any of the positions that they are now, meaning the earth and the moon, I should say, and that the moon used to shine all the time. Some of the ancient Chaldean documents refer to that. So this is really interesting stuff. Well, here's what's even more interesting if you go down the rabbit hole, and I'll put up, again, I always talk about this particular diagram, which I think is really useful because let me get the right one up here. It is, let me see here once where it is. Yeah, it's this one right here. I always talk about consciousness and the lower conscious mind, which is really interesting. See, this diagram here kind of depicts it really well. If I can get the thing to come up, there we go. This big thick dashed line is kind of what psychology might call the division between the so-called conscious mind and subconscious mind. And I would add to this that really the conscious mind is what I like to refer to as the present personality. If anybody's read the book, The Magus of Strovolos, he uses that same exact term. And I think it's a really good one. And the reason why is because we are constantly in a state of reevaluation and change. And the lower conscious mind is really what I like to call the emotional perception of reality. We take logic and reason, but here's what's most importantly, and let's see if I can get this diagram to zoom in, and I'll bring this down. And if you look at right here, what happens to be surrounding the so-called conscious mind, which is also referred to as the moon in Vedic astrology, which is our emotional perception of reality. Notice the moon's north and south node. So now, why did I get into all this? Well, consciousness, I think, is going to shift, or it might be the shift in mass consciousness that would precipitate a axis tip. A lot of times we're looking for the external when really the earth is what I like to call the soul cauldron, and it's kind of stuck on spin cycle, isn't it? And the washing detergent seems to be our egos and our perception and conscious reality. And I have to say, if mass consciousness or enough souls have passed through this so-called, what I like to call the soul cauldron, that might be what precipitates an axis tip. And, again, it is believed our solar system traverses around a central sun approximately every 25,007 to 900 years. No one knows exactly. But if that's true, and I believe it is, you could have a lot of changes happen in just short of 26,000 years. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, that something like this could happen sometime in the near future. And again, I'm not so sure that astrology is going to be the indicator as much as consciousness in a mass sense will be. I mean, when you look at astronomy and the solar system itself, if anybody's ever studied physics, you may have heard something called standing waves. they're used a lot in acoustics and in various analysis of physical terms. And they literally are energies that stand in patterns that peak and valley. They're called nodes and antinodes. See, nodes are joining points. And the solar system seems to be a really fixed pattern where souls come in here into time and space. Again, the earth is a place where spirit manifests. Really wild stuff. So anyways, yeah, people are mentioning here a lot of things about the, cycles that happen throughout different phases of the earth. And yeah, yeah, one's mentioning here 138-year cycle, and another one's mentioning 522-year cycles. You bet there are, the whole thing is cycles. And, these are good points, because clearly when we look back, we see the celestial alignments, meaning the planetary alignments, and we see various things happen. And it's so accurate, it's creepy. Again, I always mention just recent stuff like COVID, Saturn-Pluto conjunction, 9/11, the Saturn-Pluto opposition, the banks crashing in 2008, just to mention some recent ones. And if you go back, you'll see, you look at when Nixon took us off the gold standard, when World War I happened, that was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And you'll see these Kalasarpa yogas, which again, I have been mentioning this, and I haven't mentioned it in this podcast, but we are in what we call an alignment right now, where all the inner 7 planets, except Pluto, is in between the moon's eclipse points. So again, these eclipse points have a huge effect on mass consciousness. And I really think, again, this is a big wash machine stuck on spin cycle. I really do. And when you look at consciousness and the mass, way people think and where we're at, technology, the internet, I think is helping to expand it in some cases. But you got to mix into the fact here, evil has always crept in. And there's so much what we call elemental impressioning on consciousness of human beings. And these are actually mentioned in the Vedic text as samskaras. They're literally thought form elementals. This is exactly what Dr. Emoto was showing in the Petri dishes, where he showed positive thoughts literally had a sacred geometrical shape, and negativity would look like gobbledygook. And it's believed that it emits out of our third eye chakras. So we're all little miniature thought form elemental machines. And this conscious energy permeates our layers of our aura, which they say there's up to 5 of them. And they also relate to the layers of the soul. And this is interesting because when you talk about reincarnation and consciousness and awareness, the self-awareness of consciousness really has a huge effect, I think, on incarnation, and also the juxtapositions of the planets when you're born. Astrologers run around, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries. No, you're not. It's the absolute opposite, in my opinion. In fact, the Vedic astrology, or Nadi astrology, really shines a light on that I really believe we are attached or tied to the body at that first breath, commensurate with the journey of the soul and where the soul's evolutionary, progression is at. So it's pretty wild stuff. So a lot of deep stuff there, that's for sure. And deeper than we'll ever figure out, or I'll ever figure out with this lower conscious mind, but it's really worthy of looking at that, because, introspection and self-reflection has so much power, and especially in crazy times like this. So anyways, yeah, a lot of questions here. And sorry, I can't get to them all. I'm just kind of scooping a few up off the page here as they come in. But yeah, it's really food for thought. Again, I always mention these favorite books, talking about elementals. What are elementals? Well, they're etheric energy that is actually created from thought. In fact, they actually say the entire universes are the thought forms of the upper angelic forces in divinity, which is pretty deep stuff. You think about it. I mean, in physics, I've had the blessing of being around some really smart people. And I've talked to several physicists about this. And, when you really say, okay, what is energy? No one knows. It's not heat, it's not light, it's not electricity, all this. Those are manifestations of energy. We don't know what energy is. At least I certainly don't. And any physicist that I've spoken to, quantum physicists or, your hard physicists, they don't know. And, Claude Swanson, I always mention him. He was a good friend of mine. He passed away here a few years back, delved into that whole area. And Claude was an interesting guy. I played a lot of clips from him. And he basically said the same thing. He says, we do not understand in the hard sciences even what energy is. And now you get into thoughts, you get into karma, you get into planetary energies. What is all this stuff? And we talk about stars, like we're saying right now, this weather is maybe being exacerbated by the Saturn Neptune conjunction to Shiat, which is all about drowning and all that. Well, here's what's fascinating about this. What is a star? Physicists will tell you, well, it's fission, it's nuclear fission, or it's electric, right? We've heard of the electric universe theory. I personally think that stars may be portals to the upper heavens that are so bright, and this energy is modulated through them. Now, granted, many physicists will tell you, yeah, it's a contained area. You look at our sun, it's got solar flares, it's got all these, coronal mass ejections, etc., which really affect our weather, which really affect a lot of things on this planet. But what is it really? These are such incredibly powerful, balls of energy, if you will, whatever they truly are. And they're massive in terms of their not only size, but the mass itself, its weight, so the atomic energy. And I think it goes far beyond that. I think they're literally portals or pinholes in the curtain to the upper divinity of heavens and creation coming in, because it's so powerful. And each one seems to have very unique energies when you compare this in astrology, which is mind-boggling stuff. Again, I always look at the fixed stars on a person's ascendant, and that actually is called an angel. It's interesting because, the religions and the science of the astronomy and the astrology has all got different viewpoints, when you really talk to any one of them, and everybody's locked into their perception of reality. But when you really compare notes here, there may be a lot to these stars are directly correlated to angelic forces. Because it's interesting, I do these calculations on pendants. I'll show this again. I often show this. Let me see if I can find it here. These angels that I actually do, and it's really interesting, the stuff that comes up. So you can see here, those are the 7 inner planets, followed by the suffix of Aleph Lamed, which is the last 2, that little like A and L that's on the upper left top here of that arc. And these actually are calculated from the positions of the inner 7 planets from your birth chart, from the ascendant. So, we're really, this isn't just quote unquote astrology. We are in a matrix of the soul. And these are fascinating because I actually have what we call numerology. Now in the Aramaic, they call it, in Hebrew, they call it gematria. Gematria is just another name for correspondences of the numerology to various different passages that are encrypted in the ancient texts of the Bible and the Psalms and writings of the prophets. Very interesting stuff here. Can't make this stuff up. It's called gematria, and really goes down the rabbit hole. And I think, some of the texts that I have are pretty good, but I think there's much more to it than we even know. A lot of it's been lost. So what does this mean? Back to astrology. This means that you're literally in a matrix of the soul. We're not our sun signs. We're not our astrology. We are in a matrix of the soul here that is far more advanced than anyone can fully comprehend. And in Vedic and Nadi astrology, they talk about all these yogas and juxtapositions. It's so accurate. It's creepy. I talk to people all the time about, oh, my son has this, or my daughter, or, I'm in this condition. And invariably, you see the cycles in the dashas in Vedic astrology, as well as the transits. They amalgamate into what's happening in your life. And again, belief is not required. A lot of people say, I don't believe in astrology. Well, whatever. I don't know if I believe in astrology either. I don't know what I believe in. I just like to observe with an objective viewpoint to see, okay, am I seeing any correlation here? That's science. Science simply is the observation of something And does it correlate to that event in a provable way, whether you can repeat it or not? And the answer to astrology is yes. And we do have things that repeat. Every 28 and a half to 29 years, almost 30, you're going to get a Saturn return. Invariably, every single person will have Neptune squares between the early 40s and 42 years old. So there's so many cycles that we actually can repeat. And they invariably, like Sati Sate, I mentioned that a lot. That's Saturn's transit of the moon. That is a karmic release. Remember, the moon is the lower conscious perception of reality. It's like the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes, or if you will, the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen. And if you really want to go back, the reins, the horse, and the saddle. So however far you want to go back in analogy, the point is that our conscious minds are an interface to our perception of reality in this time-space world. And I think the more we wake up to that, the more we're likely to do better when we exit this meat suit known as body, which we all will do. And that's really interesting about astrology, because it's an examination of time in relationship to reality. And again, time is a very interesting phenomena to examine. Again, many people out there who I'm speaking to and been around for years are really smart people who are in the government, in physics and quantum physics and all kinds of things, who are talking about, these crafts that come in and out of here. There's no way they could get here if they were using time-space continuums in propulsions like we have. They're clearly doing something in time jumping, stargates, all this kind of stuff. Deep stuff, way beyond our perception of reality. I remember my grandmother telling me back in the early 1900s, they were seeing fireballs come across the field. One actually went through the house, she said. So, this whole term UFO is a bit, of a pop term, and I could tell you these kinds of mystical anomalies are amazing. Chris Bledsoe has said he has orbs showing up at his house. Many people have this stuff. So we are living in a world that is very mysterious and very divine and very interesting. I'll say that. With that, I got to get rolling here, but quite an interesting topic to deal in. Again, I always love my little cartoon here that came out in the late 50s, early 60s. It's Mr. Wizard. Remember Mr. Wizard? He would send the little turtle into realities, which we would liken to our lives, incarnations, right? And everything would get all screwed up, and he'd scream, Mr. Wizard, Mr. Wizard, and Mr. Wizard would wave the wand and say, twizzle, twazzle, tweezledum, or whatever he says. Time for this one to go home. Here.
Twizzle, twazzle, twazzledum. Time for this one to come home.
So cute little cartoon, if anybody ever watches it. It's actually amazing, the animation that they did back then. Of course, now we're going to see AI do animation and, the push of a button or the, sentence of a command. But interesting stuff, how, many people had consciousness that had really looked at reality in a much broader sense than sometimes we're handed in the mainstream world. So anyways, I got to run because I got another appointment here, but hang in there. We'll get through all this. And again, lots of powerful energy coming up. Pretty much. Oh, they're also, this Biden doctor is testifying too today. I still say we're going to see some crazy stuff coming unleashed here. And you're going to see some heads roll by the end of this year. There's no question. I'm actually surprised that the United States is making this correction course that it is. And again, a lot of people are very angry about that. A lot of people are very happy about that. I can just say it parallels the astrology. That's where I'm going. So anyways, you all have a good week, and I'll see you on Saturday. And thanks for watching.